Welcome to this special analyst edition of CXWise, where we share wisdom, insights, stories, and expertise from the world of customer experience. Of course, I'm your host, Nathan Bennett, and you're about to hear real-world experiences and practical advice that will elevate your CX game, no matter your title and no matter your industry. So, without further ado, let's get wise. My guest today is Sudhir Rajagopal, Research Director at IDC for Customer Experience Management. Let me tell you a little bit about Sudhir. He is responsible for research focused on how end-user brands should consider evolving technologies to create and deliver empathy at scale in the ever-changing relationship between customers and brands. In his role, Sudhir monitors the continual innovation of technologies to produce research that discusses the impact that these technologies will have on customer and brand experience. Sudhir, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us straight from Source 24 at Sprinklr HQ in New York City. How's it been going so far?
Hi, Nate. Thank you for having me. It's been going really great. I think we had a fantastic day one yesterday, and it was a ton of great information. Great meeting some of the folks, but it's going really well.
That's great. Hey, I'm curious for those of us who haven't been in attendance, what have been some of the key takeaways from your first day at Source 24 so far? And is there anything that's really got you jazzed and excited?
I think last year, I would say, just kind of taking a step back, last year was the first year I attended Source 24. I think it was the first year Sprinkler was hosting something of
Mm,
this, an analyst event last year. And this year, compared when kind of listening to Raji, open the stage up and deliver his keynote, I found the message a lot crisper.
mm,
Presentation was fantastic. He's an awesome presenter, as you can sort of
yeah.
imagine. And one of the things that really comes through is the passion, is the focus and drive in terms of getting to deliver a product what in terms of what the industry needs, not just in terms of
Mm,
what companies needs. I think in terms of what the industry needs for customer experience, and he's got that vision, and you can see that passion come through in that the way how he delivered it. The reason I said it's a lot crisper is because when you think about what Raji's vision is or what Sprinkler's vision is, when you think about looking at the edge, it's a very confusing term. There's
mm,
different explanations, definitions when you think about what does the edge mean, and if you change the context, if you change the industry, if you change the vertical, edge means different things. So when you think about it in the notion of customer experience, when you think about it in the notion of engagement, I think that's when it starts to become clear. So I think that's something which resonated much more strongly, and I still think that obviously there's still work needed in order to get that through, but that's something which came pretty clear. The other piece which really struck me as interesting was there's a focus on sort of looking ahead in terms of what's coming down the line, and so forth. And the third piece would say is that despite a lot of the innovation in AI and Gen AI, there was a lot of grounding, and I think in terms of recognizing what's really necessary to power some of those experiences. Yes, technology is good. Yes, some of these new innovations and capabilities are great in helping companies deliver to the next level, but there are some foundational elements that need to be in place. Integrations, for example, making sure that you're
mm,
connecting the data silos, connecting systems and applications. Boring work, maybe not as glamorous, hard work though. But I think
mm.
there's some grounding in some of those elements, and I'm seeing that with regards to some of the new products that's coming out. Customer feedback management being one of them, things that you've been working on for a while. And it might seem as if it may not be as innovative, but it's something that's needed, and it's something that aligns with the broader notion around bringing together a holistic set of insights to deliver on whole journey customer experiences. So you kind of look at these three things, and it's so maybe not, yes, AI is all great and so forth, but I think that grounding was something that I think is really interesting.
Hmm. Now, I know that Raji is very, very excited about this concept of the conversational economy and conversational customer experiences. And this is something he's seeing coming around the corner relatively soon. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is something that you were sort of predicting a year or so ago. And I think, you might have been one of the first people to say, like, hey, this is coming. Can you unpack that for our listeners who may not be as familiar with that concept?
Sure, sure. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it's IDC does these things called futurescape predictions, which essentially we're not Nostradamus or someone like, saying, "Hey, here's the pulse on
You
it."
got a crystal ball.
Yeah, I wish. I'd be happy if I could predict my own life or what I should get my partner or whatever. But anyway, but but these predictions are meant to be a directional guidance. Where do we think market's going to head? Where do we think, and why is that going to be the case, right? Customers' expectations, the macroeconomic factors, company investments, vendor innovations. So we look at different factors and kind of put a finger on a pulse and say, okay, where would this sort of, what does all of this mean in terms of CX or in terms of employees and, the impact it's going to have on customer experiences? And you look across in terms of channels and so forth. One of the things that I started to think about was, and you look across, right? You have chatbots, you have, even communications with companies, whether it's email, whether it's SMS, and whether it's even in person. So channel agnostic in a sense. And companies have been doing a great job. When you think about communication, you think about it in terms of asynchronous, which is something like an email campaign. You get it, and I can respond to you much later, or an SMS. It's asynchronous, versus something that's synchronous. What you and I are doing right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having a two-way conversation. But the important piece is you're having it in that two-way form. The the crux of what constitutes two-way is context. And I think with the growth in amount of data, as well as the predictability to understand and think, look across context, across multiple pieces, is what's going to start to drive that change to understand conversations. Companies today are doing really good at communicating with customers. What they're not so good at is getting to conversing with customers. But I think that's going to start to shift as you see much more of an expectation from some of these technologies. You see a lot more expectations in terms of the capability of some of these models, right? Especially with AI and ML models starting to drive up maturity. And the reason that's probably going to happen is because companies are demanding that. Your buyers are looking to say, hey, I will buy from those vendors whose models are going to provide much more accurate outputs. And so that in turn starts to put pressure on vendors to say, how can I improve accuracy of my models? How can I improve context understanding? How can I bring that into the predictions, into the outputs, into the outcomes that my models are offering? And so you'll start to see that, kind of shift the notion of understanding a greater sense of context. Combine that with something like GenAI now, which is on the scene, and that's going to expand pretty significantly the modalities, the channels, medium of communication, and going just from being, sort of linear text-based, or again, text or voice doesn't matter, but linear conversations to being a lot more of holding on to previous context. So things like when I tell you, hey Nate, like you just picked up and said, oh hey, you know that I'm in Dallas because we chatted before, but you said, how's the weather back home? You don't have to tell me how's the weather in Dallas. Like, you probably know that, right? But that's context understanding, and you and I can have that as two humans. But imagine being able to do that through a piece of technology, and imagine being able to do that at scale across, millions of customers. But that's the power of what we see is going to happen with regards to conversations. And so what I had predicted was, the way I wrote my prediction statement was, I think by 2025, it was some percentage, I think 55% of cohort of the global 2,000 companies. So I don't look at the whole population, but you take a certain sense and say, who are the more innovative companies who can start to move across this? And what I said was, customer experiences, how customer experiences are delivered, becomes much more in this form of conversations, but not just in terms of a dialogue. It becomes Conversations become the medium in fulfilling the experiences. Think about it this way. I mean, there's a Canadian retailer called Dynamite that already does this. You can ask about a particular product. I think I forget what they sell, clothes or something, I think it is. But you can ask, or some other goods. I'm horrible at shopping, but the thing, you look up your products. You try to say, hey, can you give me a little bit more detail about this particular product? What's the pricing? What's the fit, color? Do you have different sizes, so forth? And in that same dialogue, which essentially, if you think about it, is you're trying to get advice. It's a marketing, it's a sales, a commerce thing. But at the same time, you're trying to make a purchase. And in the same context of the conversation, you're able to move from exploration, awareness, finding advice about the product to actually making the purchase. I think so. Conversations move from just being sort of the systems of engagement, where you're just having a dialogue, to becoming systems of action, where you're fulfilling the experiences, you're fulfilling the customer's outcome and the journey. And I think that's the shift that we'll start to see. Putting all of these sort of technologies together, and the shift in how customers are going to start to interact with brands too.
Sudhir, as you discuss the concept of conversational, it sounds like we're getting a little bit more humanity back into all of this technology, right? Because it's, when we used to interact in a sales function, like we used to have a lot of conversations. It was conversation based. I
Exactly.
remember I used to be, when I was in high school and early in college, I worked at this really large clothing store. And one of the ways that we tried to personalize our services for our customers is we took copious notes about their preferences, what they had purchased in the past, their sizes, down to like, do they have kids? How old are their kids? When do their kids go to school? Like, we had these like 3-ring binders that we just collected all this information about our customers so that we could do as much personalization as we could back in the day. Of course, all that was in a 3-ring binder and it was on paper, right? And so we had to gain that insight and that information by actually having conversations with the customer as we move them around the store or around the department. And it seems like in some way we're kind of getting back to that little bit of a dialogue between brands. Am I dreaming, or does that sound accurate?
No, and that's you mentioned, as you introduced me, this notion around empathy at scale. Empathy at
Hmm.
scale is one of those fundamental tenets that underpins a lot of my research. But what does it mean when you think about empathy at scale, right? And I think let's it's what you just said, right? What empathy, when you think about it in terms of technology, it's not this whole fuzzy notion of just like, oh hey, yeah, I'll empathize with you or whatever, things like that, right? Which you have to do. I mean, think about the contact center as a channel, for example, and you look at the customer service agents, or you look at in person a store retail experience, and in person there is a level of empathy that needs to happen, but some of that happens naturally because we as humans have that tendency. We don't think about it. It sort of comes through. For those of us who are empathetic, I mean, of course, that there are those who aren't empathetic, and you probably won't see it. But that's just poor experiences, right? What you see, and so forth. But when you think about this as the technology aspect, it is the fundamental notion there is contextual understanding. What you just said, 3-ring binder, it's data, it's information about the customer, information about their past, what they have done. In essence, using it to make sure that you can offer outcomes that they are looking for. And I think that's the notion, right? If you use the information in the 3-ring binder, and let's use the 3-ring binder as an analogy for all of the data that you're going to hold about the customer today, which of course is going to surpass what goes into a 3-ring binder, by the way, today anyway, because of the amount of data that you're going to get, which is a good and a bad thing, but we won't touch that for now. But the the goal of using that information is to hit and deliver on the value back to the customer and outcomes for the customer in terms of what they have intended to discover for themselves or what they have intended to go seek out for themselves. I think it's getting to an understanding of that intent and delivering on those outcomes is what then determines or demonstrates whether the company has empathy. What you see is companies along that spectrum, right? You see them using information for organizational benefit. You see them using information for, say, partners' benefit, or using information to run operations more effectively. Not that it's a bad thing, because when you think about what's called the value exchange between a brand and a customer, you have this value stream, right? The organization is the one that maybe delivers a product or service. The customer is the one that purchases the product or service. They engage with the company for whatever reason. And of course, the reason the customers are engaging with the company for product or service is because there's a need for it. But when the company goes sort of, and sort of one-sided towards it, you start to see this shift in the value exchange. You'll start to see a disparity in that value exchange. So what in order to maintain or demonstrate this notion around continued empathy at scale, It's important that companies kind of look at information, look at data to see how can I deliver value back to the customer? How can I maintain what I call this notion around experiential value parity? So not only is the company gaining value from the customer, so lifetime value, for example, right, and making like retention, which is all great metrics for the company, for the organization, but what's the customer getting back in return? Are we delivering them a solid product? Are we delivering them a solid experience for it? Is there at the right price, for example? So depending on what customers are looking for, one, understanding what those outcomes are, understanding the context of it, what constitutes value for them, and then delivering on those outcomes. And I think that's what starts to bring or demonstrate this notion on empathy. So I would say data alone doesn't. Data along with insights doesn't. Data, insights, context may not still. Data, insight, concept, context back to relating it to outcomes starts to get there. And I think that's the
Mhm.
difference when you start to see a maturity between companies who are empathetic or who can be perceived as being empathetic versus those who aren't. And we don't have to name brands here, but between you and I, we could
Sure.
probably think about your favorite brand or your most unfavorite brand, and you think about who's empathetic and not. I'm sure.
We could come up with a couple, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Um, yeah, I'm glad that you brought up insights too, because you said something really cool in a conversation that we had a while back, and I really want it on a T-shirt. You said, "Become the orchestrator of insights,"
Oh wow.
and I want a T-shirt that says, "I am the orchestrator of insights."
You could just have the
But I
yeah.
think we were talking, right?
That's a great tagline,
You
but
can
thank you.
trademark it. Yeah, you can trademark it. Um, I think we were talking about this concept of unified insights fabric.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that and unpack that for us?
Oh, for sure. It's something. So just to go quick background on this, when you think about how customer experiences are being delivered, and I think it's good. I think I like the way you kind of set up these questions. It's kind of building up on each other here. This notion on data, and then you go to insights, but this notion on insights fabric. Think about what you know about a customer, right? There's information about the customer, but in order to get intelligence, it's about understanding the complete sense of what are the different actions, where has the customer been, why did the customer perform a certain type of action, what happened as a result of it, what was the emotion, what did the company do, with whom else did they speak, who were the employees involved, were there employees involved, so channels, as you start to look at different dimensions of what constitutes the intelligence around a customer, bringing a lot of that stuff together during the moment of interaction, you need to have it's sort of having a continuous sense, a sense of a continuous, a continued sense in terms of the pulse of that customer. And I think the only way you start to build that is to bring a lot of this information together. And so I called it sort of this unified insights fabric because it's sort of continuous. That's one. It's fluid because it keeps changing, and it sort of encircles the customer really, right? In terms of the channels that they're interacting, the people that they're interacting, where in the life cycle that's happening, whether it's happened in marketing, it might happen as part of the commerce journey, it might have happened as part of the support journey, maybe it's a feedback that they offered you. I mean, think about most of the times that you call a customer service center is probably because you're upset about something, something didn't work. But think about how that shifted the conversation during with the service request. What shifted in terms of your emotion, with the brand? Like, were you happy? Or did you walk in unhappy and leave happy? Or did you walk in unhappy and leave even more upset, right? Which has happened. I mean, we all have experiences, and it's very crucial. And I think contact center leaders get that, right? And one of the things which I see, and it's actually a survey I'd done recently for Sprinklr. I'm working through that right now. But one of the insights that came in is these contact center leaders really want to get that stronger sense of that digital, get the stronger sense of the digital foothold, right? And I think it's because they get the fact that there's these operational disconnects, right? And so the reason is, yes, we talk about data silos, we talk about the fact that these things are disconnected, but beyond just bringing this together, it's about making sure that you're able to share those insights across different teams. Share between what marketing may have found out, send it back to customer service, use that information in customer service at the appropriate time so that you're delivering on all of the things that we just talked about, which is empathy and outcome and value and so forth, right? That's what starts to use. So when you think about unified insights fabric, it really is that sort of connective tissue that goes across journeys, goes across life cycle, goes across interactions, with whom they spoke, and the dimensions in terms of how you measure and understand customer context, which is, you know, interaction, the emotion, the sentiment, outcome, action, and so forth.
And I know that that's such a rich topic, and I know that you could talk about it, and I could listen to you talk about it for the next hour. But I know our time is precious here. But before we go, you did bring up the report that you're working on for Sprinkler. I don't want to talk in too specifics about it because I know you're still writing it. Hasn't been released yet, and we'll hear more about that in the coming weeks and months. But I wonder if you could give us just in broad terms what that report is about, and if you could enumerate any kind of trends that you're seeing, just in broad terms.
Sure, sure. Well, it's quite extensive, but the broad theme is all about, the use of intelligence going forward. I mean, what I call intelligent experiences, but how it impacts specifically the contact center and marketing functions.
Hmm.
So we ran the survey at IDC, specifically. It was done for Sprinkler, but we sent it out to end user companies or organizations worldwide, specifically one to contact center leaders and one to marketing leaders, to understand, one, what some of the challenges they're facing, how are they trying to address some of these things, and the role of AI and Gen AI, of course, generative AI, in terms of how it impacts their functions. So, like I said, one of the things that's coming through is, I just mentioned contact centers trying to get that, improve their digital foothold. On the marketing side, it was interesting because if you think about AI, analytics, intelligence, that's been in marketing for over a decade. It's not a new thing for the marketing function. They've used that. Maybe it's more linear decisioning, rules-based decisioning, but insights and analytics, in whatever form it was in earlier days, has always been present in marketing. But I think what they're looking for is saying, how can I become a lot more effective, a lot more efficient? And I think what they're trying to do is to unlock efficiencies within marketing and the operations, in how you run it, how you go through creative, the supply chain, the content supply chain, the workflows. So I think there's a lot of those efficiency and the potential that AI can offer in unlocking that. So I think that's one thing that I'm seeing. Um, the other one is, there is a bit of this cautious optimism when you think about AI and Gen AI in CX, marketing and contact center in specific. The reason some of that exists is, one, we talked along. The discussion most of last year was, oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So what are the right use cases? Now it's I think we've kind of beat that horse a little bit to say, okay, here are the use cases. These are the use cases. Do this, do that. The difference now, I think, going forward, is shifting to, how do I think about a better adoption of AI and Gen AI, and then starting to scale that. So move away from proving or doing proof of concepts for certain use cases. Say, how can I make this more pervasive? How can I make this more sticky? How can I enable adoption and scale it? But when you start thinking about some of those larger scale enterprise issues, such as adoption and scaling, you come back to ground truths, such as some of the foundational challenges. And now companies, and I think as vendors and practitioners, we're starting to see that, oh, these are some of the fundamental things that still need to be fixed, because you're starting to connect systems together. You're starting to bring the data together. You're starting to bring insights together. So some of those, foundational challenges, do need to be fixed from a technology standpoint. But importantly, one of the big things that's also there is skills, employee skills, not just in terms of front office who are delivering, the CX, like say your marketers or your contact center reps, but it's also developers. It's also your content creators. It's also who works on the mid and back office in the marketing and contact center and operations functions, to be able to use some of these tools and technologies, and the skills that are needed to be able to do so. And I think that's another area which is a huge gap that companies are trying to scramble and try to fill. You've heard this, I think, in the market broadly, to say, we have labor skills shortage and so forth. I think
Hmm.
it's less about the skills shortage. It's about finding a shortage of relevant skills.
Hmm.
So I think that's another big gap. There are a few more, but I'll kind of save that for some of the details.
No, well, thank you for giving us a little bit of a peek inside that report. I really can't wait for its release, and I know it is a tremendous amount of stuff to comb through and to collate and to orchestrate, if you
Ah,
will. But listen, if after this conversation, if you don't change your job title, to orchestrator of insights.
I
I
should.
don't know what to do for you,
I
man.
know.
I think that
I
should be
should.
official. Put it on LinkedIn before anybody else does when they hear this, man.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks
Well,
for the endorsement.
listen, Sudhir, you have been very generous with your time. I know you've got a very busy day at Source 24. I just want to thank you for making us all a little bit CX wiser. Thanks so much for your time, my friend. Can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Had fun.